The sun over Tikara 9 was not a sun. It was a triple star system, and that meant the desert sand didn't just burn, it cooked from 3 different angles. The air shimmered like a mirage layered over another mirage. When the shuttle door hissed open, the heat didn't just pour in, it punched. Frederick Kline took 1 step down the ramp and immediately regretted everything. "Is this a joke?" he muttered, squinting against the searing glare. The sand was a pale orange, the sky a bleached gray, with sandstone ridges jutting up like broken teeth in every direction. Behind him, the group of alien students disembarked in tight formation, their long limbs and translucent skin twitching with anticipation. There were 10 of them, all enrolled in the Xenocultural Survival Exchange Program. Tikara 9 was their final exam. Frederick wasn't a student. He was a technician. A last-minute Earth addition to the observation team after the original water systems contractor from Vensari Theta had contracted a digestive virus from eating improperly preserved kelp. Frederick had been tapped only because he'd worked in arid environments before and was one of the few humans who had volunteered for cross-planetary assignments during summer. He adjusted his canvas hat and stepped aside as the instructor descended. She was tall, with a metallic sheen to her skin and eyes that never blinked. Instructor Yelna carried a thin staff and a scanner strapped to her back. "The exam begins now," she announced, her voice flat. "No external resources, no communication devices, no assistance from supervisory staff. You will each be assigned a grid sector, survive for 6 days, locate drinkable water, maintain core temperature, return to base at the end of the 6th cycle." "Excuse me," Frederick said, raising one hand. "I'm just the system guy, I'm not part of this, right?" "Correct," Yelner replied. "You are the observer. You will monitor Sector 7. You will not interfere unless a candidate is in life-threatening danger." Frederick nodded. He didn't like it, but he nodded. The students scattered, each heading toward a different quadrant. Frederick hauled his pack onto his shoulder and trudged toward an outcrop near Sector 7. The sand resisted every step, and the heat clawed at his lungs. By the time he reached the ridge, he was drenched in sweat, his back already aching. He set up his small dome shelter, anchored the scanner on a tripod, and activated the thermal monitor. He drank a careful sip from his water ration and sat down on the shaded side of the rock. The scanner beeped softly, tracking the nearest student identified as Kiv, a species from the ice moons of Charon. Kiv was already drifting southward, his pace uneven. 3 hours passed, then 4. Frederick didn't move much except to flip the solar panel and check his readings. But around the 5th hour, a chime alerted him. Kiv's temperature was spiking. Frederick zoomed in on the scanner display. The alien had collapsed near a dry basin. "Come on." Frederick muttered and grabbed the med pack. He hesitated. Protocol said he couldn't interfere unless things became lethal. The scanner pinged again. Kiv's vitals were dropping fast. Frederick grabbed the emergency beacon and sprinted. The sand gave way beneath his boots. He slid down the basin wall and reached Kiv just in time to see the alien's eyes flickering. His breathing was shallow. Frederick dropped to one knee. "Hey, Kiv, right, can you hear me?" Kiv twitched but didn't reply. Frederick pulled out a hydration injector and inserted it into the port on Kiv's side. The device hissed, delivering electrolytes and fluid. He checked the scanner again, still critical. All right. Frederick looked around. The basin was ringed with stubby plant succulents, barrel-shaped and covered in thin spines. Not the kind of vegetation one ate without consequences, but it was the only sign of water for kilometers. He pulled his survival knife and crouched beside one of the cacti. He sliced the top clean, revealing a pulpy interior. He scooped some into a vial and ran the portable chemical test. The result flashed, mildly toxic, high in alkaloids, not drinkable. Frederick frowned. He knew cactus water wasn't safe straight from the plant, but the structure looked similar to Earth's barrel cactus. He pulled out the micro still from his kit standard issue for desert survival. It wasn't meant for alien flora, but it could distill water vapor. He loaded the cactus pulp into the chamber and started the process. 10 minutes later, a few drops condensed in the collection vial. He ran the test again. The screen turned green. Yes. Frederick filled a small vial and returned to Kiv, who was barely conscious. He inserted the new fluid into the hydration injector and waited. Minutes passed. Kiv's breathing stabilized. His core temperature dropped by a full 2 degrees. Frederick radioed in the emergency pickup protocol and marked the location. A drone would retrieve Kiv and bring him back to base. By the time the drone arrived, Frederick's legs were shaking. He hadn't realized how little water he had left himself. He stumbled back to his ridge shelter and collapsed into the shade. His scanner chirped another student, Jarn, had veered into Sector 7. Frederick watched as the alien wandered near the same basin. Jarn didn't collapse, but he was sluggish and confused. Frederick tapped into the feed and watched as Jarn approached a cactus, stared at it for several seconds, then backed away. Frederick rubbed his temples. He wasn't supposed to help. But he also wasn't going to watch another one go down. He loaded more cactus pulp into the still, distilled another vial, and left it in a marked container 50 meters from his shelter. Then he sat back and waited. Jarn eventually found it, drank it, sat down with a stunned expression. The next morning, Frederick woke with a pounding headache. He was dizzy, his lips cracked. The sun was merciless. He checked his canteen, less than a quarter left. He spent the next hour harvesting more cactus pulp, carefully avoiding those with thicker spines or deep red interiors. He distilled what he could and sipped the result. It tasted like metallic rainwater but didn't burn going down. By the third day, word had spread. The scanner showed students from other sectors drifting toward his location. One by one, they arrived dehydrated, exhausted. Frederick didn't speak much. He just kept harvesting, distilling, distributing. Instructor Yelna arrived on the evening of the 4th cycle. She stood outside Frederick's dome, eyes scanning the gathered students. "You have compromised the exam," she said. Frederick leaned out of the shelter, sweat dripping from his brow. "I didn't spoon-feed anyone. I just processed the only water source around. You created a dependency. I gave them a demonstration. They figured the rest out." He nodded toward Jarn, who was now distilling cactus pulp with his own salvaged parts. Yelna stared for a long moment. "How did you know how to process the cactus?" "I didn't. I ran a chemical test, then a distillation, then another test. That's how survival works where I come from." She said nothing for a while. Then she turned and walked off into the desert. The 5th day came with a sandstorm. Frederick was securing his solar panel when the wind hit. It wasn't just wind, it was angry, blinding grit that burrowed into every seam and zipper. He ducked inside the dome and activated the stabilizers. The scanner showed the students hunkering down in makeshift shelters, some under rock overhangs, others behind natural ridges. The storm lasted 8 hours. When it cleared, one student Por was missing. Frederick didn't wait for a command. He grabbed his scanner, medpack, and a thermal blanket and followed the faint heat signature northwest. He found Por half buried beneath collapsed sandstone, his leg pinned. The alien's skin had darkened, signs of internal overheating. Frederick knelt beside him. "Can you move?" Por shook his head slowly. Frederick dug the sand away from his leg. It was twisted at an unnatural angle. He knew the protocol: do not attempt to move a possibly broken limb without support. He activated the drone beacon and stabilized Por's vitals with the injector. Then he placed the thermal blanket over him and sat down. "You're gonna be all right," he said, mostly to keep himself awake. The drone arrived an hour later. Frederick didn't return to the ridge. He went straight to the base. He collapsed halfway there from dehydration. He woke up in the infirmary with an Roman 4 in his arm and his lips covered in balm. Instructor Yelna was standing beside his bed. "You should not have interfered," she said. Frederick turned his head slowly. "They'd be dead if I didn't. You altered the test conditions. I adapted." "That's part of survival." There was a long pause. Then she asked, "Show me the process." He did. Slowly, with trembling hands, he demonstrated how to identify the cactus with the lowest alkaloid content, how to process the pulp, how to set up the still without electric power. By the end of it, Yelna said, "We will be adding this to the curriculum." Frederick nodded weakly. "Good." She turned to leave. "Hey," he said. She paused. "Next time you assign an exam like that, maybe include a warning about triple suns." Yelna did not laugh, but she didn't argue either. The infirmary on Tikara 9 wasn't designed for humans. The ceiling was too low by maybe a hand's width, and the cot felt like it had been molded for someone with a tail. Frederick lay flat, ankle elevated and wrapped, the Roman 4 feeding into his arm with a slow, regulated rhythm. The fluid was cool, a synthetic hydration solution that smelled faintly of crushed mint. A squat alien with a shell like carapace, and 4 eyes, 2 of which blinked independently, stood at Frederick's side, tapping at a translucent panel held between 3 pincers. "You'll need to stay horizontal for at least 1 more cycle," the medic said. "The fluid imbalance in your tissues is correcting, but you've put strain on your kidneys. You humans burn through salt like it's seasonal." "I didn't exactly have a buffet out there," Frederick mumbled, shifting slightly. His hip barked in protest. "And your desert doesn't exactly roll out the welcome mat." "You overexerted," the medic replied, eyes tracking several readouts. "Standard operations protocol for your physiology advises against repeated exertion in triple-star environments." "You ignored it. No protocol accounts for someone cracking their leg under a rock slab. That's why we don't send your kind out here without a reason." The medic leaned back, mandibles clicking once. "You were the reason, I suppose." Frederick didn't respond. His throat was dry again. He gestured toward the water bulb near his cot, and the medic handed it over without ceremony. "Drink slow," the medic added. "You've been metabolizing faster than your intake. You humans don't store reserves the way most species do." "Yeah, well, we're used to running on fumes," Frederick muttered between sips. A soft chime interrupted the medic's next comment. The panel lit up and one of the blinking eyes narrowed. "You have a visitor," the medic said. "Instructor Yelna." "Oh, good," Frederick sighed. "I was hoping for a nap and a report card." Yelna entered without fanfare, her silver skin dulled by a thin dust film, her scanner slung diagonally across her chest. She didn't acknowledge the medic, who quietly stepped aside and busied himself with a tray of instruments. "You ignored direct protocol," Yelna said, stopping at the foot of the cot. "You provided material resources to examinees, tampered with their decision-making environment, and altered the outcome metrics." Frederick stared at the ceiling. "Is this going to be a lecture or a court-martial?" "Neither," she said. "The council reviewed your actions. They concluded you demonstrated a form of adaptive leadership. It was not part of the intended study parameters, but the results were informative." He turned his head. "What kind of informative are we talking about?" "There were 67 behavioral deviations across the cohort following your actions. The majority demonstrated accelerated problem solving after exposure to your methods. One even re-engineered their own distillation rig from scavenged drone parts." Frederick blinked. "You're telling me I sparked a science fair project. You introduced interventions that bypassed traditional instinct-driven survival patterns. Some of them began collaborating." "That's unprecedented." He let out a low exhale. "So what now? You handing me a medal or a muzzle?" Yelna didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped beside the cot and extended a small rectangular device. It projected a schematic in midair, a topographic map of Tikara 9 southern hemisphere, dotted with markers. "The council wants you to lead a supplemental module, voluntary, multi-species, focused on field improvisation. Unsanctioned methods included." Frederick squinted at the map. "You're giving me students, observers. They'll study your methods, not the other way around." "I'm not a teacher," he said. "You're not a survivalist either," Yelner replied. "But you lived." He looked back at the ceiling. "I'm still in traction. You'll be ambulatory in 2 days." "We'll begin then." She turned and left. The medic cleared his throat. "I'll add calcium boosters to your drip." 2 days later, Frederick was upright, limping slightly but coherent. He met the first group of observers just after sunrise, 8 aliens from 5 systems, none of whom looked remotely like each other. One resembled a walking fern, another had the texture of polished basalt. They gathered near the southern ridge, where the heat shimmered but didn't yet scorch. Yelna stood nearby, recording the session but not interfering. "All right," Frederick said, tapping the side of the storage crate. "You've all read reports or whatever they gave you. Doesn't matter. I'm not going to talk at you. I'm going to show you how to not die." One of the observers, a tall, glassy-skinned being with 4 arms, made a series of clicking sounds. A A translation module on its chest buzzed. "We do not possess internal salt regulation. Your methods may not apply." "Good," Frederick said. "Then pay attention and adapt them to your body's weirdness. I'm not here to save you. I'm here to show you what I did. You make it work for you." They watched as he knelt beside a cluster of low brush, fingers brushing the base of a pale-stemmed plant. "This," he said, "isn't for water. It's for shade. You use these to mark microclimates. Cooler pockets form under ridges like this one. That's where you dig." Another observer, this one with a beaked face and 3 eyes, tilted its head. "You excavate randomly." "No. You look for signal plant species that only grow where there's subsurface moisture. They're your tell. Dig with purpose, not desperation." Over the next hour, he demonstrated how to test soil consistency with a stripped reed and how to construct a rudimentary evaporator from a broken lens and a food wrapper. When one of the observers questioned the reliability of the method, Frederick shrugged. "You want reliable, stay home. Out here you bet on percentages." By midday, they had built a functioning water trap using only field debris and 2 meters of thermal tubing. The yield wasn't much, maybe 100 milliliters, but it was clean. "That's your backup," he said, "your main supply. Cactus distillate, but only certain types. The rest will fry your gut or shut down your liver." One of the observers raised a limb, skin shifting hue. "How did you determine which were viable?" "Trial and error," he said. "Emphasis on error. But once you test one, you don't need to guess again. Record it, map it, learn the soil it grows in. You can find it again." They followed him down a slope toward a cluster of bulbous plants with fibrous skins. He knelt, selected one, and sliced it open with a practiced motion. "See that coloration? Pale green, not red. That's key. Also, no bitter smell. If it stinks, it's dangerous." He passed around samples for observation. The fern, like alien, pressed one sample against its skin. The surface changed color slightly. "Your epidermis detects toxins?" Frederick asked. "Yes, we absorb through contact." "Taste is irrelevant." "Then you're ahead of the game. You can skip the part where your stomach revolts." The sun climbed higher. By late afternoon, they had compiled a shared index of usable plants, water traps, and shelter options. Frederick's shirt was dark with sweat, his throat raw, but his eyes were alert. Yelna approached as the group disbanded, each observer retreating to catalog their findings. "You've shifted their assumptions," she said. "They're beginning to question the binary of survive or fail." Frederick leaned against a rock. "That binary's useless. You keep it, you guarantee panic. Panic kills faster than heatstroke." Yelna studied him for a moment. "How did your species develop such improvisational variants?" "We didn't have a choice. We evolved on a planet that changes its mind every month. You either adapt or you freeze, burn, drown, or starve. Usually all in the same year." She considered that, then asked, "Would you teach another cohort?" He looked at the distant horizon, where a dust plume marked a student returning from their assigned grid. "I'll teach them as long as they're willing to listen," he said. "But they've got to make it their own. I'm not handing out cheat codes." Yelna nodded once. "Agreed." A breeze stirred the sand behind them. For a moment, the desert seemed almost serene. Then a sudden, high-pitched screech echoed from the ridge, an alarm tone from the scanner Yelna had slung across her back. She tapped it, and a small projection unfolded. One of the students had collapsed 6 kilometers away, vitals unstable. Frederick was already moving. "Get the drone in the air. I'll prep the evac site. You shouldn't exert further. I've got salt tabs and a hydration booster. I'll manage." Yelna didn't argue. She transmitted the coordinates and followed at a distance. Frederick ran with a steady, limping rhythm over the dunes, the sun slicing across his back like a blade. The scanner in his hand pulsed faster as he neared the downed student. Another test. Another lesson. Another chance to use what he knew, and he wasn't about to let anyone fail it alone. The student was lying face down, one leg twisted beneath them, a faint heat shimmer rising from their body. Frederick dropped to one knee, breath ragged, and placed 2 fingers gently against the alien's upper torso. There was a pulse, rapid, irregular, but still present. Their skin was smooth and dull blue like river stone and radiated alarming warmth. "Don't move," he said, though the student didn't respond. "You're not cooked, not yet." He opened the med pack and pulled out a thermal wrap, unfurling it with a sharp snap. It clung awkwardly to the alien's broader shoulders but held once secured. He checked for injuries, no bleeding, but the left arm was twitching involuntarily. Overexertion and heat stress, Frederick muttered to himself. Classic. He tapped the scanner. The drone was still 5 minutes away. That was too long. He pulled his canteen, barely a sip left, and poured a measured trickle onto a cooling sponge. He pressed it gently to the student's thorax. "You're gonna hate this when you wake up," he said, "but I'm not hauling you out of here with a kidney shutdown." A soft gurgle came from the alien's throat. "There it is, you're still in there," Frederick said. "Don't try to talk. Just keep sucking oxygen." The drone arrived in a gust of grit and wind, kicking up the sand in a tight spiral. Frederick shielded the student's face, then helped guide the loading arms under their body. The drone sealed around the alien and lifted off with a low hum. Frederick took a step back and staggered. His legs gave out and he dropped into a squat, hands braced on his knees. "Not yet," he hissed. "You're not collapsing, you're just recalibrating." He pulled a packet from his belt, a salt glucose mix, and tore it open with his teeth. It tasted like chalk and lemon rind, but he forced it down, chasing it with a mouthful of lukewarm cactus distillate from his hip flask. His stomach cramped, then settled. The sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows over the ridge. He waited until the nausea passed, then started the walk back toward the main compound. By the time he reached the perimeter, his shirt was dry again, the sweat long evaporated. The gate recognized his ID and hissed open. He stepped through and was immediately intercepted by Yelna, who paced alongside him without a word until they reached the hydration station. "You're limping worse than before," she said, scanning his gait. "Yeah, well, rescuing your test subjects isn't exactly low-impact cardio. You should have summoned another drone to extract yourself, and leave them out there alone. That'd be a great morale booster." She didn't reply. He dropped onto the bench by the water dispenser and filled a cup. It vibrated faintly in his hand as his muscles trembled. "You're not going back out today," she said. "Didn't plan to. I've got a class at dusk anyway. 3 of the students rewired their field scanners after your last session. They claim they've optimized thermal detection range by 12% using scavenged lens fragments and a rebalanced capacitor array. Sounds like they're ready to teach me something." He took another drink. "Good, that's the point." Yelna studied him. "Why do you continue? What, breathing, exerting this much effort? There's no reward system, no ranking, no compensation. I never asked for one. That remains unclear to the council." "I'm not doing this for your council," he said, standing slowly. "I'm doing it because I know what it feels like to be out there with the wrong kind of help. Or none." She followed him as he made his way toward the training dome. Inside, the 8 observers were already setting up, each carrying their own modified equipment. One had replaced their hydration pack with a coiled membrane that pulsed faintly. Another wore a cooling vest made of dried plant fiber interwoven with copper threads stripped from a defunct drone. Frederick entered without fanfare, but they turned toward him with an alertness that hadn't been there days earlier. "Today's your final," he said. "I'm not handing you problems. You're going to hand me solutions." The basalt-skinned observer raised one hand. "We've identified 4 new viable plant sources. 2 contain trace minerals we can metabolize directly. One is only partially digestible but can be soaked to remove irritants." "Show me." They laid out their samples, each labeled and tagged with collection coordinates. Frederick examined them, took a knife, and sliced into one thin-walled with a translucent interior. He sniffed it, then dabbed a bit on the back of his hand. "No burning. That's a good start." The fern-like observer stepped forward. "I've mapped the soil composition where each was found. High in alkaline silicates, low organic content, but the plants thrive." Frederick nodded. "Then you found something I didn't. That's the job." The rest of the session was spent testing, cataloging, and refining. The observers demonstrated a cooling system using reflective sand layered over cloth and a method to trap condensation from exhaled breath overnight. Frederick watched, occasionally interjecting but mostly letting them lead. As evening deepened, the temperature dropped rapidly. They moved outside to test the condensation trap. A few minutes later, a bead of water formed on the inner surface of the device, a small but measurable success. "Well," Frederick said, standing with his arms crossed, "I think you've officially graduated from not dying to actively surviving." The four-armed observer tilted its head. "Is this the end of instruction? Unless you want to keep going." The group exchanged glances. "We will continue," the basalt-skinned one said, "but we will teach each other." "Good," Frederick said. "That's how we stay alive longer." He turned, ready to head back when Yelna approached from the side, holding a small data wafer. "The Council has issued a formal acknowledgement," she said, handing it to him. "They'll be integrating your instruction into the baseline survival training for all future candidates." He raised an eyebrow. "Guess that's their version of a thank you note. They've also approved a research grant. Small but ongoing. You'll be listed as primary field consultant. I'm not a scientist. That's irrelevant. Your methods produced results. And resilience." Frederick looked past her to the students, who were still bent over the condensation trap, adjusting angles and noting changes. "Let them have the credit," he said. "They earned it." Yelna didn't argue. Later that night, Frederick sat alone on the observation deck, legs stretched out, a flask of distilled cactus water in one hand. The stars above T-Cara 9 weren't anything like Earth's. They seemed closer, like they could be plucked down and tucked into a pocket. The desert was quiet. Not dead, just resting. He leaned back, exhaled slowly, and let the silence settle. His muscles ached, his joints throbbed, and his skin had taken on a permanent shade of sun-baked bronze. But he was alive, and more importantly, so were they.